Jerry Tompkins, who came from Austin, Texas today.
Thank you, Randy, and I could spend all my time thanking Randy for the wonderful job he's done. Not here in Dayton, which he's done a fine job many times here, but from his base in Minnesota, calling us and arranging schedules and getting us here. And that's been a joyful thing to be with other people who have a stake very much in the Scopes trial. I first visited Dayton 52 years ago, arriving on an August day. I do think Dayton has only summer as a season. And was in a little green Volkswagen Bug, very hot. And I just kind of hung out for a couple of days and got the feel of the town. Dropped in, not knowing really Mr. Rogers, but I found myself in his drugstore and met him. And he invited me back, and we drank Cokes to cool off. And he told me that Mr. Bryan and his wife, Mary Baird, had rented rooms at his house. And that, in fact, the great commoner had died there 2 weeks after the trial. And as we talked on, he paused a minute and he said, "You know, I guess that brass bed he died in is still up in my attic." He said, "I broke that bed down and put it up there a long time ago, but I haven't seen it." I was too poor to say, "You know, that's a piece of Americana, and I would sure like to buy that." I had a wife and 4 children back in Arkansas at that time. But it was a wonderful town then, and still was haunted by those giants that had been here for a brief time in 1925. But all I want to talk about with my time is connecting with John Scopes. I'm not sure exactly how I found out where he was, but he was in Shreveport. He was still working for United Gas Corporation. And I called there one day to ask if I could speak to John Scopes, and the operator didn't say anything to me. She just rang. And the first voice I heard was Mr. Scopes, and I heard a single word, "Scopes." And I was pretty intimidated. You know, I was already about to meet a hero, and it didn't sound like it was going to go too well. But I said, "I'm Jerry Tompkins. I'm from Arkansas. I've read about your trial, and I'd like very much to meet you sometime." "Well, when can you come over?" And I thought real fast. My parents just lived 20 miles out, and I thought I could get over there anytime. I said, "I'd like to come Wednesday." He said, "Well, that's a good time to come." He said, "Mildred stays and plays bingo at her church, and she'll be there pretty late. So you come on and meet me at my office, and we'll visit as long as you want to." Wow. Wow. So I got there and found his office, and we began a couple hours visit. And somehow it just went well from the first. And I think part of it was I was so full of the trial and details of it, I couldn't wait to tell him all about it. And he responded sometimes with mirth, with laughter. And what was happening was, this man who did not live in his past simply had put many things out of his mind. And he was rather intrigued by this. So we had a great visit, and I left, and I didn't know what we were going to do after that. But on my way back to Arkansas, I thought, you know, I wonder about all those people that were with him in Dayton, the scientists, the newsmen, who might still be around if he'd like to reconnect with them. So I called him up, and he was very friendly. And I said, "Well, I'd like to come for another visit." "Come on," he said. So we visited again, and I told him what I'd like to do. And I said, "What I'd really like to do when I talk to these people is to tell them I have met John Scopes." "Oh, that's okay. That's okay, boy. Go ahead and do that." And that was my entree with these people I found. And that's a whole other story of how that came to be. But he made that possible because everybody who remembered him from the trial remembered him with warmth and appreciation. They liked him. So anyway, let me talk about John himself. A little bit on into it. We had opportunity, Marcia and I did, to be with John and Mildred at the 30th anniversary of the LSU Press, which had published my book. And the press really had a book on William Faulkner they were pushing that year, and they put a lot of money into the production. The Scopes book, D-Days at Dayton, was handsome enough, but it was a more modest publication. But what happened was, at the reception, you had all these LSU students, and they came in. They did not want to talk to James Webb, who had put in a wonderful project on William Faulkner. They wanted to talk to John Scopes, and they lined up. And John was gracious as he could be, but he got tired. And I remember us finally glancing at me, and he had enough, so we left. But it was a great time with him. And then I thought I'd mention the last time that I visited him 8 years later. He was in the hospital. Mildred had called and said he had an operation for cancer. She thought he was going to be all right, but she wasn't sure, and if I could get over, would I come by and visit him still in the hospital. Well, we lived out in Midland by that time. That was a longer trip. But I went on over to Street and found him in his room. He was in bed, but he was in the mood for a good visit. And we visited and we talked about a lot of things, not necessarily about the trial, because after 8 years we had other things to talk about. But at some point we began to talk about sort of the news of the day. And he made the statement, lying down, I still remember, he was looking up at the ceiling and he said, Jerry, we have worshiped at the altar of technology and it's going to destroy us. I had never heard John Scopes make any kind of statement like that. And we talked about that a little bit. I was so impressed by that statement that the moment I got out of the room, I pulled out pencil and paper and wrote it down. So I've just given you a quote from John Scopes. Well, John died. I never saw him again. As Randy mentioned, we did have contact from time to time with Ruby. But last night, I got to thinking about that statement he had made, and that's what I want to end with. And what I went back to in my mind was the time. He died in 1970. In July of the year before, that's when we landed a man on the moon. But also 1970, I think, was the year that President Nixon got through the Environmental Protection Agency bill. And one reason that was happening was we were beginning to deal with smog, and came into the picture, and there was a new awareness of things that cause cancer. We were beneficiaries at that point of a lot of good technology that made us conquerors of our world, but we're doing a lot of damage to other people. Jumping forward, I'm thinking about now and our technology, and all of us sitting here are vulnerable to having our identity stolen by somebody thousands and thousands miles away, and we never know who they were, except our money would be gone and we'd be messed up with all kinds of connections to our credit card company and even our Social Security. So that's one thing that technology has delivered to us. We also are aware, listening to news these days, about technology existing that can, a technician thousands of miles away can deliver a smart bomb to a car in a crowded row of cars and obliterate that car and its occupants. And think about that. That's a marvelous technology. And of course, another that we hear even more about is the drone. Also can deliver bombs to distant cities. It can obliterate our enemies, but it also has a tendency for collateral damage. So I think about John Scopes. We have worshipped at the altar of technology and it's going to destroy us. Maybe he was a prophet in a way, but in any case, he was aware of the dangers of technology in a way that had never occurred to him. Now there are many good things that we have. Cell phones. We're going to get self-driving cars. But there are downsides to everything, and we're discovering those too. If you've been in a meeting where half the people have their heads down in a cell phone, you already know something of what that impact is. But anyway, John Scopes, maybe he's not just a historic figure. Maybe he's a man for our time too.